Hey, drywall repairman here. Thanks for visiting my channel. I am a licensed drywaller. I do a lot of drywall repairs. Patches on ceilings, patches on walls, stress cracks. Simple do-it-yourself type drywall repairs you can do. So please watch and learn these videos and please subscribe. Thanks for viewing. Hey everybody, just doing another video. This is a V-notch on a stress crack. Most stress cracks on ceilings and walls are vertical or horizontal cracks. This is a diagonal crack. Diagonal cracks are usually structure related stress points, so they go diagonally. Usually with these stress cracks, the ideal world, we want to dig out the old tape. On these diagonal ones, it's the actual fracture in the sheetrock. So with these fractures, we have the V-notch technique. Basically, V-notch is channeling out the area like I'm doing here on this stress crack, opening it up, channeling it up. So when we do our mudding, our mud gets inside this V-notch channel and really secures a patch. In the ideal world, whenever you're doing stress cracks, you always want to put screws in your framing. On these diagonal ones, sometimes there's no framing there, so it's a loose patch, a fracture area. So what I'm doing here is I'm putting a piece of 1x2 in this ceiling. I'm adding a couple pieces of 1x2. Basically with this, you just have to open up the area, cut open a little box area like a 2x2 inch, 2x3 inch, just enough to get a piece of wood in there. If you're able to get wood way back on the diagonal crack, go ahead and do that. But 2 pieces is good enough. We're just basically putting the pieces of wood in here to secure the middle of the patch and the stress crack point. So when you push up on the sheetrock, it's not loose anymore. It's basically securing the 2 parts of the fracture to tighten it up. We don't want to have to do all this work fixing the stress crack and then there's movement and it causes the area to re-crack out. So this is all you can really do without totally opening up the ceiling and doing a reframing issue. So we're just adding these 1x2s. It's a simple tip on simple stress crack repairs like this. So basically, once you get it all V-notched, you get the pieces of wood in there, add plenty of screws. Wherever you can find studs, add plenty of screws. Always add screws on both sides of the cracks, basically tightening it up. Sometimes you don't have pieces of wood there. That's why you have to open up the wall and add a piece of wood in there. Especially if you repaired an area before and then down the road a year or so later and it re-cracks out, you're going to have to do this 1x2 technique by putting a piece of wood in the wall. If this 1x2 technique don't work, then you're going to actually have to open up the whole wall, like I said, and redo it with new framing. Add plenty of screws. This is 1/2 inch sheetrock, so I just use 1.25 inch, 1.5 inch screws, drywall screws. Add plenty of screws, go through, scrape all your areas. And with this V-notch, it's opened up. So with V-notches, I always like to clean them out, make sure all the debris is out of there. So basically we have a nice channel to fill in. Basically that way we can pack the area full of mud. A lot of guys, the term we call is pre-filling. You want to pre-fill this. The best way is to always pre-fill. Some guys like to use joint compounds on pre-fills. With the joint compound, you're going to have to let it dry overnight. Since these are jobs that I do in one trip, I always do pre-fills with a hot mud. Here I'm using a hot mud, a 5-minute mud. This is just basic 5-minute mud that I mix pan by pan. Clean water, you just mix it up. You don't need a lot of mud. You want to have it pretty thick. You don't want to have to put the mud in it and it falls out. So you want to have really thick first coat mud to pre-fill your gaps. Mix up your materials. If you're not comfortable using hot muds, then of course always use joint compounds. With joint compounds, for a beginner, if you do mess up with a joint compound, at least you can sand away your mistakes. With these hot muds, they set up quick. So basically we're just going to pre-fill the V-notch. Anytime you have a big gap in drywall, you should do a pre-fill method anyways. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to pre-fill this, pack it full of mud, nice and tight. I'm not trying to bulge out the area with mud. I'm just pre-filling, pushing it in, making sure it's getting inside that V-notch groove. Once we get the area all packed in full of mud, then I'm going to follow it through with a fiberglass mesh tape. On all my drywall repairs, I always use a fiberglass mesh tape. It's your go-to drywall tape for all drywall repairs. I'm sure there's a lot of videos out there. People say use this tape, use that tape. Always, always, always use your fiberglass mesh tapes. I've been in the drywall repair business for a long time. I always use fiberglass mesh tapes. I hardly ever use paper tapes, any other tapes. This fiberglass is your go-to for any repairs. It's a stronger material. And basically I'm just following through with my 6-inch knife, pressing the fiberglass tape down inside the wet mud. It's easier to work with it right now while the mud's still damp. If you're concerned about it re-cracking out, just go ahead and put 2 layers of fiberglass tape. 2 layers, why not? 2 layers won't hurt. Just go ahead and double layer this. It's giving it extra security, peace of mind. You want to do all this work, you want to do it correctly, so let's add another piece of fiberglass. Push it down, slick it out, make sure everything's nice and clean. You're just going to head and let this set up. Go ahead and do a nice tight first coat. We're using hot muds here, so you would just do a nice tight skim first coat. We're not trying to build up the area, a big hump on the wall, because this is a hot mud. So we just do a tight first coat. Once you get everything first coat, go ahead and clean out your tools. Always clean out your tools. I like to clean up my tools using the hose. If you have a hose method, find a cleanup area and clean up your tools right away using a hose. Always clean up your tools when you're done with them. Never let your tools set up. Then you're going to have rock hard mud on your tools and it can ruin your expensive tools. High quality knives like these, sometimes it's a investment in these tools. So you want to keep them clean, keep the mud off it. Clean as you go, clean your hands. You don't want this stuff setting up in your hands. It is a chemical, so if you don't have a hose hookup, you can always clean your tools out of a wet bucket and sponge technique. This is my usual go-to method, but if I do have a hose available, a water bib available, I always use a water washout area, usually an area that isn't high traffic area, so you can clean up. Since I'm working with hot muds, once these hot muds set up, I always want to come check them. This is a 5-minute mud, so about a 4 to 6 minute mark, I always come check on the muds. With this, I'm doing the slick out technique. You always do this with hot muds. 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 90 minutes. Slicking it out. Basically, you take a clean 6-inch, straight 6-inch knife and your wet sponge, and you basically feather off the edges. You don't want sharp edges where your mud work meets your existing texture. You're basically feathering out the materials. It's kind of like a wet sanding technique, I would say. You're just feathering off the materials before they set up. You don't let this hot mud set up. If you let it set up too long, it's going to be rock hard and you won't be able to manipulate it and slick it out like this. So you always want to catch your materials as they set up. Like I said, this is a hot mud technique. If you're using joint compounds, you have to let dry overnight. If you're not comfortable using hot muds, of course, please, please, please use joint compounds, because joint compounds are easier to work with if you do make mistakes. Once it's all slicked out, I'm going to mix another pan of second coat mud. Same as before with the first coat, clean water, couple scoops of 5-minute or whatever quick set mud you're going to use. Mix it up using a 6-inch knife. Usually do about a half a pan, good sponge load or so of water, and just mix it up thoroughly. Don't mix it, you're in no rush. It is a quick set mud. You do have to work quickly with it, but we just want to mix it up thoroughly. Get all the clumps out, just back and forth, back and forth. Just mix it up really thorough, get all the water and the clumps out of it. I like to work with these 5-minute muds because they're easy to work with. If you have to add a little bit more water, just sprinkle in some water. I don't want it as thick as first coat because I'm going to do a quick second coat. Second coats are just a tight skim over the first coat, and you always want to go past your first coat. With these hot muds, you don't build them up as heavy. You don't do a heavy coat like you would with the joint compound. Joint compounds tend to shrink back. These hot muds don't shrink back. So you just do tight coats with hot muds. Basically, I'm using a 12-inch knife and I'm going to do a tight skim coat. Pass my first coat. Feather your edges, and just skim it out. You're just doing a tight coat. It's easier to do 2 or 3 tight coats than it is to have one big heavy coat. The whole objective here is to coat the area. You don't want to see the repair. If you coat the areas too heavy, you're going to see a big crown on your ceiling or a bad patch sticking out because the mud's built up too heavy. So it's easier to do tight skim coats. Same thing, once my hot mud sets up, I'm going to do the same thing as the first coat. I'm going to slick it out in a 6-inch knife. I'm basically slicking out all the extra mud. You're pushing down pretty hard, so all the extra mud is getting pushed into the crevices, and you're manipulating it and taking off the extra mud. Sometimes more is not better. You just need enough materials to feather out the repair and to coat the repair. We're not trying to build a hump on the ceiling here. We don't want to see this patch after we texture it. So we're working with these hot muds. Like I said, always say, if you're not comfortable working with muds, always use a joint compound. I only use these hot muds because I'm on these jobs in one trip, so I have to get them repaired, coated 2 times, and textured in one trip. So that's why I work with these hot muds. If it was my personal property, I'd probably work with joint compounds because I have more time. With joint compounds, though, you have to let them dry overnight. So you have the first coat, let it dry 24 hours. Second coat, let it dry. Texture, let it dry. So I always do coating process with hot muds on these one-trip jobs. Once it's all slicked out, feather your edges. You want your edge to always be feathered out nicely so it's ready for texture. You're just going to let this set up. Pretty much now you're ready for your texture process. Depending on your region, you may have different textures. Here I have a spray knockdown. I'm just using a regular hopper and I'm using a thinned out joint compound. Now you never use hot muds for texture. I always use joint compounds. Some regions have a special spray texture formula you can mix up powder form, but sometimes it's easier to use these joint compounds. I'm just spraying it, nice consistent spray pattern, nice and even. Cross it off, keep your pattern the same. We're just spraying on with these knockdowns. Basically, you're spraying on a heavy splatter and then you're going to turn around and knock it down. I like to do my knockdowns with a nice, perfect, straight 6-inch knife. A lot of guys use bigger knives. If you use bigger knives, they're great for brand new rooms, room additions, full sheets of drywall. But whenever you're doing small jobs, patchwork like this, it's easier to use a 6-inch straight knife. A clean 6-inch knife. The 6-inch knife, you can control the pattern and it'll give you a nice texture match when you're trying to knock down. Sometimes, depending on your knockdown, you might have to do lighter or heavier knockdown to get the knockdown pattern. So you always want to look at what you're matching. I always like to knock down my outside edges first and just slowly knock it down. I like to go the opposite direction of the tape pattern. Since this was a vertical tape pattern, I like to cross it off, knock it down horizontally. Just go the opposite direction. Light knockdown. I'm not pushing down hard. The knife is just gliding over it. That's a knockdown. Light knockdowns. Once you're done with that, you can pull off your masking, pull out your masking, feather off your edge, knock it all down. Then you can clean up your mess, clean up your tools, clean up everything, and pretty much the job is complete. With the job, they'll just have to let the texture dry for at least 24 hours or so. And knockdowns like this, you have to lightly sand with 150 to 200 grit sandpaper or a foam medium to fine sanding block, and then primer and paint. But this is just a basic repair. I just wanted to make a video on these V-notch techniques. It's a common trick of the trade that can easily be done to fix a troublemaker crack like this one. But hey, please subscribe and like these videos. Thank you.